Dawn on the ridge, mud to my knees and metal in my hands, the orders said forward while the machine guns cut lines through the smoke. I fired from that shallow fold in the ground and felt my body refuse to move the last few steps my superiors demanded. Later, under a dim lamp in a ruined house, I watched them slide forms across the table, their questions clipped, the ash in the tray never disturbed. They wrote my failure in ink and called it a reprimand. I carry it instead as the slope, the stump, and the men who didn't come back up. Late 1944, on a cold sector of the Western Front, an infantry company holds a thin line along a battered ridge. The ground is muddy from weeks of rain. The trees are splintered, cut down by shellfire and machine gun bursts. The front has stopped moving, but the fighting has not. Here, the story of a rifleman's quiet refusal begins. The company is officially at half strength. In practice, it is less. Several names on the roster belong to men in field hospitals, to men whose graves the platoon has never seen, or to men who simply vanished during night patrols in the fog. Replacements have not arrived for weeks. Trucks reach the rear village with fuel and ammunition, but not with new soldiers. According to the paperwork, the company still exists as a defined unit. On the ground, squads are blended, sections mixed, roles blurred. The rifleman at the centre of this account is one of many whose name does not appear in history books. He has been on this ridge long enough to recognise every broken tree by silhouette. He sleeps in a dugout reinforced with scavenged planks and a door taken from a ruined farmhouse. And most nights he lies down fully dressed. He keeps his rifle within reach of his hand even in sleep, habit now more than regulation. The operational situation is simple on paper. Higher command wants pressure maintained along the front to pin enemy forces. Small attacks, probing assaults, raids at dawn. Nothing decisive is expected from this company. They are told to attack so that others elsewhere might advance. Orders arrive through the usual chain, typed at a divisional office, carried down by staff officers, rewritten in pencil at battalion, read aloud at company. On the ridge they are translated again into hand gestures, quick diagrams in the mud, and short phrases shouted over the wind. The rifleman spends his days on routines that keep a depleted infantry squad functioning. Then he wipes mud from his rifle with a torn strip of cloth that once was part of a blanket. He checks the action for grit, listens to the familiar metallic sounds. He repacks his ammunition in canvas pouches, counting rounds he knows may not be replaced soon. He dries damp socks near a small illegal fire in the bottom of the trench, watching steam rise from the wool. The squad rotates between sentry duty, repair of their positions, and short nervous patrols into the scrub between the lines. Each task has its pattern, its repeated gestures. He has walked the same narrow communication trench so many times that he unconsciously sidesteps the same roots and broken duckboards. The first signs of the problem that will lead to his refusal appear quietly. Casualties come in ones and twos. A man wounded by shrapnel during a short barrage, and another hit by a sniper while moving between positions. Someone twists an ankle in the darkness and is evacuated, leaving a gap in the section. Each loss adds strain. There are no new faces to fill the holes. The squad leader reassigns tasks. The rifleman finds himself carrying more ammunition, helping man the light machine gun when needed, and standing on sentry posts for longer stretches. Conversations in the dugout grow short. No one wastes words predicting when they will be relieved. Several men have heard rumours of advances on other parts of the front. For them, the front is a foggy tree line and an enemy who occasionally fires flares and sporadic bursts. The battalion has already launched several small attacks over the past month, and each was described in orders as limited objectives or local improvement of the line. According to later summaries and operational logs, gains are measured in fields and orchards. For the men, they are measured in names scratched out on platoon strength returns. The rifleman has taken part in 2 of these attacks. He remembers advancing at dawn through wet grass that soaked his trousers, hearing the rattle of machine guns from a farmhouse he could barely see. He remembers the abrupt fall of a man ahead of him, the way the column bunched up then scattered. He remembers the order to pull back because fire from flanking positions had not been silenced. On paper, that action became a paragraph. Objective not secured, casualties moderate, enemy resistance stronger than anticipated. In the trench. And the result is 1 fewer man in the squad and a sense that the pattern is repeating. Weeks go by without replacements. The company clerk in the rear writes to higher headquarters, listing their losses and shortages. These documents move along channels where paper is abundant but manpower is not. Vehicles and fuel are prioritised for other operations deemed more decisive. The ridge remains a holding task. The rifleman's world narrows to his sector, his squad, and the next 24 hours. The cold enters everything. It seeps into the wood of rifle stocks, into fingers that grow clumsy on trigger and bolt. He learns to fire with numb hands. He learns to judge distance by sound when visibility is reduced by fog and smoke. Sleep comes in fragments between stand-to periods before dawn and after dusk. Yet his squad is officially part of a larger platoon, but the lines are blurred. Men from other sections join them on duty. They share what they have: a can of meat, a piece of bread hardened by the cold, a cigarette passed from one to another, glowing in cupped hands. The tension between orders and reality grows as the company is tasked with more. Battalion staff demands frequent patrols to maintain contact with the enemy and to show that the line is held aggressively. The rifleman is sent forward again and again into the broken ground. He memorizes dips where water collects, places where wire has been cut, and the position of a burned-out vehicle that provides an illusion of cover. One night he counts only 5 men in his patrol, including himself. The route is the same as the week before, but the voices are different. 2 of the regulars are missing, one in a field hospital, one buried near a crossroads behind the line. The squad leader grows quieter. He spends more time studying the map pinned to the trench wall with a knife. He traces the same shallow arc with his finger. Their sector, the neighbouring company, the positions marked as enemy strongpoints. The rifleman notices that the same objectives appear in different orders. A copse of trees labelled as a minor hill. A farmhouse marked as a road junction. These points appear again and again in penciled arrows, objectives for small local attacks. The pattern becomes clear even to those who do not see the written orders. They are expected to lean forward, to keep the enemy occupied, even if they cannot permanently hold the ground they seize. According to training manuals produced in rear areas, infantry in attack follows a sequence. Artillery prepares the ground, machine guns lay down suppressing fire, riflemen advance in bounds, coordinated and controlled. On this ridge the sequence is incomplete. Artillery is short of shells and assigned to larger operations elsewhere. Machine gun teams are under strength. The rifleman's squad often goes forward with only thin support, relying on surprise and darkness. He watches the gap between doctrine and practice grow. Official slogans pasted on walls in the rear village speak of determination and attack spirit. In the trenches, men speak of how many magazines they have and whether their boots will last another week. The problem escalates when orders arrive for a new assault. This one is described as crucial in messages passed down from battalion. Higher formations intend to straighten the line, to seize a small rise overlooking a road the enemy uses at night. The assault is set for dawn. The plan circulates through designated channels. At battalion, it appears as an operation order with numbered paragraphs. At company, it is simplified and handwritten in a notebook smudged with mud. For the rifleman, it becomes a few sentences spoken in the cramped space of a dugout lit by a single candle stub. They are to advance at first light. They will cross their own wire, move down a shallow slope, and then climb toward the rise. The enemy is believed to hold the reverse slope with machine guns and mortars. The company commander explains that a short artillery preparation will precede the attack. There will be a poke screen if possible. Other units on the flank are supposed to move at the same time to prevent the assault from being isolated. The rifleman listens, leaning against the damp earth wall. He notices which parts of the plan are phrased as certainty and which as intention. He hears, "if ammunition allows," and "as far as we know," more than once. He glances at the faces around him. Most are pale with tiredness. Many bear several days of stubble, skin marked by grime. A few are new men who arrived not as formal replacements, but as strays from other units, reassigned informally to fill gaps. Strength returns compiled that night show that each platoon will attack with fewer than the recommended number of riflemen. This is reflected only as a figure on paper, but in the trench it means that gaps in the line cannot be filled if someone falls. The rifleman sharpens his bayonet by habit, though he has rarely used it as intended. Metal scrapes on a small whetstone, a familiar sound. He checks his ammunition again. He redistributes grenades within the squad. He ties a strip of cloth around his wrist so that he can recognize his own sleeve in the smoke. As he prepares, he runs through the map in his mind. He knows the lay of the ground ahead. A shallow dip that accumulates water, a patch of broken fence, the stump of an old tree. He also knows where machine gun firers raked the slope in past attempts. Several shallow craters mark previous artillery and mortar bursts. In conversations that evening, the gap between official optimism and soldiers' experience shows itself. Yet the company commander speaks of the importance of the objective. He cites orders from battalion emphasizing that pressure must be maintained. He notes that the enemy is reportedly as exhausted as they are. Among the squad, words are sparing. One man remarks that the last time they tried to reach that rise, they lost 3 in as many minutes. Another points out that the promised artillery then had been brief and inaccurate. No one speaks loudly. Complaints are voiced in half-sentences and silences. Discipline regulations about defeatist talk are known to all. Posters in the rear and occasional lectures remind them that refusal to obey orders in the face of the enemy is a serious offence. The Rifleman has absorbed these regulations. He has signed forms acknowledging them. Yet he understands the language of punishment. Field confinement, hard labour units, courts-martial. He also understands the weight of repeated futile assaults on thinly held positions. As night deepens, he stands his last sentry shift before the attack. The ridge is quiet except for distant artillery from other sectors. Flares rise and fall along the horizon. He hears the dull clank of metal from the enemy line, and occasional bursts of machine gun fire, short and probing. In his dugout after midnight, he lies awake rather than sleeping. He listens to the breathing of the men around him. He can distinguish them by sound. One wheezes slightly from a chest wound, not severe enough for evacuation. Another grinds his teeth in his sleep. The Rifleman thinks of the slope they are to cross at dawn. He thinks of the numbers in their squad, and he knows how many have been lost in similar attempts. He also knows there will be no replacements if they fail and are reduced further. The decision he reaches is not dramatic. It forms slowly like frost on a window. He concludes that the planned assault, with their current strength and the likely limited support, will not secure the objective. He believes they will be pushed back again, leaving more men dead or wounded in the shallow dip below the rise. He cannot calculate exact probabilities, but months on this ridge have given him a practical sense of risk. He decides that he will not advance beyond the first patch of cover. He does not declare this aloud. He does not make a speech. He imagines instead how he might act when the whistle blows. He considers feigning a weapon malfunction, dropping behind a fold in the ground, or deliberately falling short of the intended line. His form of refusal will be quiet, folded into the confusion of attack. He knows this still carries danger. Superiors may notice. Comrades may interpret it as abandonment. Discipline measures might follow. Yet he weighs this against the near certainty in his mind of being killed or crippled in a frontal rush with too few men and too little support. In the hours before dawn, he prepares as if he intends to follow orders completely. He checks his equipment. He repeats the briefed route in his head. He moves through routines that have become automatic. The assault forms up in the grey light before sunrise. Men move from dugouts into assembly trenches. Voices are hushed, limited to necessary commands. Non-commissioned leaders walk along the line, counting heads, unchecking weapons, correcting positions. The company commander confers with platoon leaders near a makeshift command point marked by a map case and a field telephone. Artillery in the rear fires several short salvos. Shells passed overhead with a familiar tearing sound. The explosions ahead are seen as brief flashes, muted by distance and fog. The Rifleman stands in the second wave of his platoon. He feels the damp of the earth through his boots. He smells cordite and wet soil. He hears the soft clink of equipment, the cough of a man suppressing a cold. The signal to move is passed along. There is no shouted slogan. A hand gesture, a nod, and men begin to climb from the trench. He follows because as to hold back entirely at this point would draw immediate attention. They cross their own wire at a pre-cut gap. Odysseus' ground beyond is uneven, scarred by previous attacks. He moves at a pace slower than full rush, but not obviously hesitant. He uses every fragment of cover, crouching behind low rises, pausing longer than the doctrine manuals prescribe. The first enemy machine gun opens fire. The sound is harsh and continuous. Bullets snap over their heads and cut into the ground. Men in the forward wave drop. Some flatten themselves and try to crawl, others stop moving entirely. Mortar shells begin to fall on the slope. Shrapnel whips through the air. Smoke starts to drift, but it is patchy and thin. The planned smoke screen is incomplete, perhaps due to shortages or misfires. The Rifleman feels the familiar contraction of the world in combat. Noise and movement narrow to immediate threats and nearby bodies. While he reaches the first patch of cover he had marked in his mind the night before, a shallow fold in the ground behind a shattered tree stump. According to the plan, this is only a temporary position before the final rush to the crest. According to his decision, it is as far as he intends to go. He drops behind the stump and presses himself into the earth. Bullets whip through the branches overhead. He cycles his rifle and fires several rounds toward the enemy position, aiming roughly where muzzle flashes appear. To observers, he appears engaged in the attack. He reloads and fires again, but he does not rise to move forward when the hand signal to advance is given. Some soldiers near him make the attempt. One pushes up and runs a few steps before a burst cuts him down. Another crawls, making slow progress. There are then freezes as machine gun fire concentrates on his position. The squad leader shouts for movement, his voice almost drowned by the noise. The rifleman stays low. He shouts back something about fire being too heavy, about waiting for it to slacken. His words are partly true. The fire is intense, sweeping the slope. Behind him, more men cling to the same cover. A tangle of bodies and equipment forms around the shallow fold. The attack stalls. On paper, this will later be described as pinned by effective machine gun fire. At the moment, individuals make small decisions that combine into immobility. The rifleman continues to fire in short bursts. He changes magazines, keeps his head low, feels splinters from the stump sting his face. He watches time slip away. The window during which surprise might have helped closes. As the enemy is fully alert now, mortar fire becomes more precise walking toward their position. Officers and non-commissioned leaders attempt to restart the advance. Some move up and expose themselves to encourage others. One waves his arm and is thrown backwards by a hit. The line of men in the open thins. Radios and field telephones crackle with incomplete reports. Command posts in the rear try to understand what is happening from fragmentary messages. The artillery that was supposed to support the second phase of the advance does not fire a planned follow-up barrage. Reasons for this will later be unclear in the surviving records. It may be ammunition rationing, communication failure, or the belief at higher headquarters that the objective has already been reached. On the slope, the effect is simple. The men remain exposed without renewed cover. After an indeterminate period, orders are relayed to pull back. Withdrawal under fire is always risky. Men rise from shallow cover and run or crawl back up the slope. Some are hit in retreat. The rifleman moves carefully, sliding from one fold of ground to the next. He fires occasionally to discourage enemy movement. He reaches the wire and slips through. Behind their own lines, medical teams move among the returning men, directing the wounded toward aid posts. Stretcher bearers bring in those who cannot walk. The company's casualty list grows. In the dugouts and trenches after the attack, there is no celebration. Men sit in silence or exchange short remarks. They remove mud from weapons, repack ammunition, and check small wounds. The rifleman takes stock of his own condition. And he bears only minor cuts from flying splinters. He notes who from his squad is missing. The squad leader, breathing hard and with a grazed arm, moves along the trench. He counts again. He looks at the rifleman, then away. He has seen that some men did not move when ordered. He also saw the fields of fire from the enemy's position. He knows that pressing forward would likely have led to more bodies in the dip and perhaps no gain at all. Later that day, company and battalion officers gather to compile reports. They write that the objective was not taken. They list reasons: stronger than expected enemy resistance, insufficient artillery preparation, open ground swept by machine guns. They estimate casualties. The figures are added to higher-level summaries. In such documents, no mention is made of individual decisions on the slope. Officially, the assault failed in a familiar way. Yet within the company, talk circulates about hesitation. Some officers speak of lack of aggressiveness. They refer to training manuals, to doctrine that emphasizes unbroken momentum in attack. Discipline becomes a focus in subsequent meetings. Battalion staff sends reminders of regulations concerning obedience to orders in combat. Posters about duty and courage appear again in the rear. A few days after the failed assault, an investigation begins at company level. It is not formalized as a full court-martial at first. Instead, it takes the form of interviews. Platoon leaders are asked to describe the conduct of their men. Non-commissioned leaders are questioned about who moved when the signal was given, who held back, and whether any clear refusals occurred. In a small room in a damaged farmhouse used as a temporary command post, the rifleman sits on a wooden chair. A table in front of him holds forms, a lamp, and a half-empty ashtray. The company commander and a battalion representative sit opposite. The tone is controlled, not shouting. They ask him where he was positioned during the assault. He answers precisely. They ask whether he heard the order to move forward. He says he did. They ask why he did not advance beyond the first fold in the ground. He mentions the intensity of fire, the visible casualties, the absence of the promised smoke screen. He states that the movement seemed impossible without being immediately hit. The battalion representative notes his responses on a form. He references regulations about attacking under fire. Yet he points out that doctrine expects soldiers to continue moving to overwhelm enemy positions. The rifleman answers that the enemy already had clear fields of fire, that previous attempts on that slope had ended the same way. He speaks calmly. He does not claim fear as his main reason, though it was present. He frames his refusal to move further as a judgment about tactical impossibility. The line between such judgment and disobedience is thin. At higher headquarters, discipline files accumulate for many units. Some cases lead to immediate severe punishment, especially where refusal is collective and open. Mutinies and mass disobedience are treated harshly. This case is different. It involves individual hesitation in the midst of chaotic conditions. Evidence is mixed. As some comrades say that they too could not move because of the intensity of fire. Others, more eager to align with official expectations, hint that certain men seemed reluctant even before the assault. The squad leader is called in. He describes the situation on the slope. He mentions that the rifleman fired from cover and did not run backward prematurely. He also acknowledges that he did not see him join the final attempted rush. The officers weigh these statements. They consult strength returns. They see that the company has been without replacements for weeks. They recognize that any severe punishment removing a trained rifleman from the line will further weaken an already depleted unit. At the same time, they are under pressure to maintain discipline. The circulars from corps and army headquarters stress that reluctance to attack must be countered firmly. There have been other cases along the front. In some, courts-martial imposed exemplary sentences to deter similar behaviour. In this instance, a compromise emerges. The rifleman is not subjected to the harshest possible penalty. Instead, he is formally reprimanded for failure to advance according to orders. The reprimand is entered in his file. He is assigned extra fatigue duties in the rear area when off the line. He spends hours carrying ammunition, repairing trenches, and assisting at supply dumps. These tasks come on top of his usual frontline responsibilities. The intention is to mark his record, to signal that his behaviour has been noticed and disapproved of, without losing his experience entirely. Within the company, if the message is clear, rumours of his interrogation and punishment spread. Men understand that even quiet forms of refusal do not escape attention. Yet they also see that the officers have stopped short of the most extreme measures. The atmosphere shifts. Some leaders become more insistent during briefings, emphasizing duty and attack spirit. Others, having watched the assault fail under heavy fire, quietly adjust how they interpret orders from above. They begin to phrase reports in ways that account for ground realities while still satisfying expectations. Phrases like temporarily untenable under current conditions appear more often in written messages. Patrol routes are chosen with greater care. Assault plans, when possible, are modified to include flanking moves or attacks at different hours, rather than straight frontal rushes at dawn. The rifleman returns to his dugout on the ridge after the formal reprimand. He resumes his routines. He cleans his rifle as usual. He stands sentry. He goes out on patrol. The extra fatigue duties weigh on him, adding physical exhaustion to the mental strain of months at the front. At night, he lies awake more often. He reels through the assault in his mind, frame by frame. He sees the slope, the stump, the men who tried to move and fell. He replays his decision to stay in the fold, wondering how others judge it now. Some comrades treat him no differently. They have seen enough to understand his reasoning, even if they do not say so openly. One remarks, quietly while sharing a cigarette, that he too almost stayed down. And another tells him that a dead man cannot be of use in future battles. Others, more rigid in their view of duty, keep a small distance. They do not openly accuse him, but their silences grow longer in his presence. The institution around them continues its rhythm. Trucks arrive with ammunition, rations and new orders. Trucks leave with wounded men and prisoners. Staff officers replace maps, update overlays and schedule new minor operations. The ridge remains in their hands, though the line shifts slightly with each action. Enemy forces across the way are equally tired. Their own discipline measures and quiet refusals leave few traces in the rifleman's world. In official war histories compiled after the conflict, this particular assault receives little attention, if mentioned at all. It appears as a brief note in a larger narrative describing operations along the front. Terms such as local attack and fail to secure objective are used. Casualty figures are rounded. There is no room in such summaries for the detailed story of one man's decision to halt at a shallow fold in the ground. Yet traces of the episode exist in archival material. A reprimand in a personnel file, an interview transcript stored in a folder marked with a unit designation and date range, a battalion report noting that some elements appeared reluctant to advance under heavy fire during the action. Historians studying frontline exhaustion and discipline have occasionally cited such documents. They point to them as evidence of the strain on infantry who fought for long periods without relief or replacements. They interpret these small acts of refusal as part of a broader pattern. In that pattern, soldiers did not always match the idealized image promoted in training's pamphlets and posters. They adapted, hesitated, and sometimes quietly resisted when orders seemed disconnected from realities on the ground. The Rifleman's quiet mutiny did not alter the course of the campaign. The ridge remained contested until larger operations elsewhere shifted the line. He survived the war, according to fragmentary post-war records, but disappeared into civilian life without public recognition. No medals were awarded for this episode. No monument bears his name for refusing an order he judged suicidal. His act remains embedded in paperwork and memories that faded as years passed. The institution's response was also quiet. There was no formal acknowledgement that repeated futile attacks with depleted unitors were unsustainable. Instead, adjustments emerged in practice, where commanders who had seen too many similar failures began to argue for different tactics, greater fire support, or postponement of attacks when units were clearly under strength. Some of these arguments were accepted. Others were overruled by demands from higher headquarters. Discipline remained a central concern throughout. Circulars on obedience continued to circulate, even as staff officers privately admitted the limits of what could be demanded from exhausted men. In the end, the episode illustrates a tension at the heart of infantry warfare in that period. Armies needed soldiers to attack under conditions that were often far from ideal. At the same time, they depended on those same soldiers' judgment and experience to survive and remain effective over months of combat. When these two needs collided on the slope of that ridge, the result was a quiet refusal and an equally quiet reprimand. The Rifleman carried the memory of his choice and its consequences. The war machine around him recorded it in a few lines of text, then moved on. For those who study the conflict, his story offers a narrow but sharp view into the reality of frontline exhaustion, depleted squads, contested orders, and the restrained ways in which individuals sometimes pushed back within a rigid system. It shows that not all acts of resistance in wartime are loud, collective, or openly defiant. Some happen in a shallow fold of ground at dawn under machine gun fire. That when one man decides that he will fire his rifle but will not move another meter forward. For viewers interested in more accounts of these overlooked moments and unsung individuals, they may wish to stay with this channel for future stories.